I'm John Hall. This is Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. Paul Kavulak of Nebraska Brewing Company is my guest today, and he's coming up in a moment. But first, I'm going to ask you to check out beeredge.com for articles, to subscribe to our newsletter, and more. And we're also on social media at The Beer Edge. And if you like the show, please consider leaving a review on your platform of choice. Also, check out the Smoky Conversation on the This Week in Rausch Beer Facebook page and on Twitter and Instagram at TW Rausch Beer. This episode is brought to you through support from NZ Hops. In a little country far down in the Pacific, you'll find a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. This is NZ Hops. The industry originated in 1843, not long after the early settlers arrived from England. Years of partnership with a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through generations sees the current-day master growers proudly providing 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at nzhopsltd. This episode is also sponsored by Athletic Brewing. At Athletic Brewing Company, their innovative process allows them to brew great-tasting craft beer without the alcohol. From IPAs to stouts to golden ales and more, they offer a full selection of beers starting at only 50 calories. Now you can keep your head clear and enjoy the refreshing taste of beer anytime, anywhere. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 6-packs or more. So we're almost there. We're almost to the point where we can be back out in the world, drink with people we like in person, visit tap rooms, and just reconnect after a long year under the pandemic. Vaccines are rolling out, and I hope you're on the list to get one or already full of the scientific marvel. This is one of those shows that I wanted to do in person. I've known Paul Kavulak for most of the time that I've been covering the beer industry, and that's a long time. He and his wife Kim co-founded Nebraska Brewing Company 14 years ago, and I've been at their breweries, seen them at festivals and events, and shared pints in cities across the country. And any time we're together is a good one, so I was hoping to do this in person, but it was still going to be just a while. So when I had the chance, I jumped on the phone to talk with him. And this conversation was actually spurred on by an email that I got earlier this week, and I'll touch on that during the show. The brewery makes award-winning barrel-aged beers, along with a core lineup that is really solid and a lot of fun to drink. And they're also now looking towards the future of beverage. There's a lot to cover, and we're going to get into it all. But being that it's March and we're a year into COVID, I started off by asking Paul how it's been going during the pandemic. He spoke to me, obviously, from Nebraska. Here's our conversation.
Everybody has their own story of survival, but when COVID began to peek over the horizon, it was kind of one of those things. I knew the likelihood of shutting down the tap room was real. So to the extent that you can prepare for it, we saw it coming. What we also stared in the face was the prospect of, when all the retail establishments shut down, our draft beer would essentially fall.
Yeah.
What was a little bit further than I expected was it fell to essentially zero outside of the keg and draft stuff that, we had on hand and would trickle out to markets that weren't fully shut down yet. But that was a slamming of the door. And then the package sales continued, and then we ran headlong into the 12-ounce can shortage. So it's one of those, I think every year brings with it different things that you have to deal with and scramble for. The past year has seen more of those, obviously, than normal. And I think one of the biggest things that it's a mental thing, but when you lose contact with all of the people in the industry, that, seeing a face or sharing a beer is pretty important. And at first, it was expected. No one was moving around. And then before you knew it, it seemed like the year had become 5.
Yeah.
And, you wonder where the rest of the industry went, where you fit. And, as I mentioned before, it was kind of lather, rinse, repeat. And you're just wondering if you're ever going to, see the other end of this thing. And I think we are now.
What does that mean, where you fit in the industry? Like, versus, if we go back 2 years of March of 19, where did you think you fit? And then what happened in the course of, 2 years? That's such an interesting concept to me of, you saying where you fit. And I'm wondering, yeah.
Yeah, I think, March of 19 and maybe even before that, we were well known, we had international sales too that would get a hold of us primarily for the barrel aged beers and the stuff that we excelled at. And, there's a pile of medals that we have, not because we sought the medal itself, but because it was external validation. You make a beer, and of course every brewer thinks that their beer is the best beer on the planet, but when you send these out to the competition and it's blind, to come away with a medal, all the way up through the international awards and GABF, I think it kind of solidifies what you'd hoped you were setting out to accomplish, and that was, to be one of the best brewers in that space. And with COVID, people couldn't get out as much. And it's interesting. I listened to a podcast from the BA yesterday with their economist, who said that COVID probably affected the lower incomes in a worse way than the higher income people. And so what I felt was the barrel aged beer slowed down, the sales of it at least. And when I say you wonder where you fit, you wonder, is the barrel aged beer slowing down because of COVID, or because, there are other people out there trying just as hard as you to make barrel aged beer, and that's what's selling? So I think every brewer, if they don't have an insane voice in their head casting self-doubt every day, I think, they're probably doing themselves a disservice. But the lack of interaction, again, I go back to it with the industry, it makes you wonder every day, are we still doing the right things? Are we still excelling? So we still continue to enter competitions and, and still come away with medals. So I think that helps, but it also gives you this sense of mental drift.
There's a lot that I want to unpack in all of that, but you were an early adopter of barrel aging, at least for your generation of brewers, and you're coming up on 14, 15 years now. But you have longer teeth than most in the modern era of craft, and you adopted barrels pretty early. It struck me as I was pre-COVID walking into breweries, everybody, even if they'd been open for 3 days, was really eager to show me their, and I'm doing air quotes here, barrel program. And sometimes it would be 2 or 3 barrels in a corner, and, they didn't really know what they were doing or what was in it, but they had a barrel program. And it's sort of something that's been come to be expected by most customers of some sort of barrel age offering, be it for an anniversary or whatever. What's that competition been like for you with the, as new generations of brewers open up, especially in your state where there's been some pretty strong growth? How has that impacted your barrel program?
Well, I think you kind of run the gamut there of
that was a lot. I just threw a lot at you. Yeah.
No, I mean how the industry kind of evolved, and you're right. When we started barrel aging, here's that thing again. We were circulating in the brewing universe, and you get out to Falling Rock and you meet Sam and Vinny, and their barrel aging programs really sparked a lot of interest. So we've always said, and somebody will knock me off the soapbox someday, but we always said we were the first brewery that we're aware of in the industry that was using wine barrels for the sake of wine. And that was because I had a heavy interest in wine before I went into brewing. And, we stumbled into this Belgian Golden Strong, and I thought, man, that'd be great for a Chard barrel. And there it was, it started to take off. And for us, it was less an endeavor in stature or trying to say, hey, we're here, we've got a barrel aging program. We did it for the sake of the beer. And I think when barrel aged beers rose to the prominence and the level that they were at, it was tough to find a barrel aged beer out there that didn't really have some wow factor. Like, geez, this is really elevated beyond the stuff we can buy normally, and that created an aura around those. And I think for the brewers that that start out and they want to have best brewery on the block and they want to knock off the big guy, I think it's good, to get in the game. I think as most brewers, at least this brewer would tell you, don't release a beer if it's not what you consider the best that you can do. And I think there are people out there that are barrel aging, and because it's now ubiquitous, it tends to, take that aura down a notch when it's just an average beer. And the consumers, who are out roaming around, which is great, they're finally starting to get back out again. They might enter a brewery and say, "No, it's okay. I don't like that barrel aged stuff," because they encountered a brewery that didn't have great barrel aged stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the competition has hurt it all. I guess if you do your research and which breweries can make some good barrel aged beers, you go to those and try them all. I mean, that's what we all want you to do. Try them all, and don't come away thinking all barrel aged beers are great, or all barrel aged beers are mediocre. Just try them. Try and give them a shot, and we'll continue to make them as good as we think we can.
You've mentioned, you got us on this barrel age beer kick because I know it's something that you're passionate about. But when I visited a couple of years ago, and I was sitting in both the pub that you had at that point and in the tap room, I was really struck by, and I had to go back through my notes to see how I actually qualified it. But I wrote down that your core beers, your everyday beers, have this sort of Midwest sensibility to them. They're not trying to be flashy. They're not trying to be over the top. They're just good drinking beers, true to style, or maybe they have their own little flair to them. But as much as the barrel age program is a passion for you and has racked up medals and awards and everything, it's those core beers that keep the lights on, right?
Oh, absolutely. The barrel aged stuff I'm fond of because you have a heavy hand in nurturing the evolution of that. It's kind of call it a vertical or a suite of brands off to the side. And then Tyson, by the way, was also heavy handed in that. But the core beers, that's what started the company. I remember, I can see it in my mind's eye right now. I remember the moment homebrewing after weeks of disgust with not getting what would become Cardinal to have the right nose. I literally gave up. I can see it now. I gave up on the whole hobby, and I had a fermenter with a large lid on top, pulled the lid aside, and dumped every ounce of leaf hops that I had left in that fermenter. And I nearly kicked it over and just let it flood my basement. And but I threw the lid. Yeah, I threw the lid back on it, and it just 2 weeks later I came back and I said, okay, it's time to clean up the mess. And I pulled that lid off to start scrubbing, and I went, oh man, that's got something good going on. So I finished it, and I had a little homebrew filter set up, and my wife was down there, and I said, hey, you got to try this. I'll bet we could sell this. And that became Cardinal Pale Ale, and core beers, the German Hefeweizen, that was a homebrew back then, and that's where it started for us. Core beers, well made, take it home. Cardinal is going to taste like Cardinal was 2 years ago. And sure, we experiment. We play around the fringes, and I have to chuckle because Tyson will love hearing this. We've attempted to make a hazy IPA now twice, and it has all the characteristics that an IPA or a hazy should have, except we fail at making it hazy. And it settles out, and we're not really going to dump flour in it or anything weird like that, but it's one of our biggest sellers right now, and it's we call it just a hazy like IPA. And we're not doing that to
if you close your eyes, you can imagine the haze.
Yeah, there you are. It's a great hazy IPA.
So it's great for drinking in the dark. Yeah
Core is what keeps the lights on.
But so Tyson Arp is he's your head brewer. We should mention.
Yes, absolutely.
But when you first opened, and it's, I know I've beat this drum probably too much on the show, but I still find it fascinating that 14 years ago, selling something like a Hefeweizen, selling something like a pale ale or even a nut brown was going to be a tough road in Nebraska, and pretty much anywhere in the U.S. I mean, and let's be honest, like craft is still not, a huge section of the beer industry or overall beer sales, but in places where quote unquote fancy beer or beer that was not an American light lager, that was just a tough sell. So how did you approach it in those early days? What was the pub a necessary part of that, of bringing people in with good food and then slipping them your beer at the side?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it. The pub for us was a gateway to get people exposed to those beers. We couldn't call EOS Hefeweizen a Hefeweizen back then because people, in spite of our efforts to educate people, we had to call it wheat. And then, we collided with Boulevard's American wheat, and, then it further confused things. So ultimately, we straightened that out after we went through the education phase. And you're absolutely right. Relative to these beer styles, I want to say we were the 5 brewery in existence, number 5 in Nebraska when we emerged. Now, we weren't the 5th. There were other breweries that, came and went before us, but we were the first 5th operating brewery when we emerged, and we did it in a part of town southwest of Omaha that really was underserviced. There was no brewery out in that area. So when we get to the people that were experiencing these beers, and I've had, there's a list of stories here. The one was our wit beer, and every once in a while, we'd have them fill out reviews, just a paper review. Hey, what'd you think of the beers? And the one I got, and I still laugh at today, was this lady was very put off by the beers, and she said that our beer was too beery. And there was this recurring comment that would come up, how the wit beer tasted and smelled like hot dog water. And
Oof.
For the life of me, when the first one came up, I thought, well, you just don't understand craft beer. And when it,
Yeah.
when it hit 2, 3, or maybe even 5, I said, there's got to be some science behind this. And I finally sat down with one of these people, and we started to talk about the beer. And the same beers, couple different pours, but the hot dog water thing was still there. And I said, well, here's the ingredients. And I said, there's some cilantro in there. And she said, oh, I hate cilantro. And so then we started to go off on the side, and sure enough, these people that have an extreme aversion to cilantro would pick up this hot dog aspect, which it was amusing, because there's nothing you can do with that. But to further the dialogue here, I remember selling in a town. It's essentially our hometown now, outside of Omaha, Louisville, Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And I would take samples out there, and the bartender, really nice lady, and she was trying to get the owner's attention. And I'm sitting at the end of the bar, and she yells, "Hey, that guy with the weird beer's back."
Jeez.
And the whole bar turned and looked, and then I handed out samples. And ultimately, that gentleman, Corey and Good Times of Louisville, they had every draft handle that they had for a while was ours. And we frequented a lot, and that changed a tremendous number of minds. Because it's a Busch Light world in Nebraska. And
Busch Light. Wow. All right.
Yeah, if you're able to connect outside of that universe, you've done a good thing.
When did you start to realize that running a pub, like a restaurant, was not going to be in the long-term cards for the future of your brewery?
Man, I don't know if I want to eat up too much of your time here, but yeah.
I mean, it's like a 50-minute show, so we still got a little bit more to cover, but yeah.
Well, when we first emerged in 2007, I always joke and say that we started Nebraska Brewing Company on the day the Great Recession started. Mm-hmm. So we, for a year, you got that honeymoon window, and everything was going decent, and the world around us was in flames, and then, revenue started to go in the other direction as well. So you wondered, one, is it the world around us that's being affected? Or two, is it us? Are we somehow failing to connect and bring people back? And through the Great Recession, we began to see, the major chain stores that occupied that mall space, one by one, started to vacate and go away. And, this occurred over a period of time. It wasn't just like it was year 2, but when those big box stores and the reasons for people to visit that mall began to go away, we shifted from being what I would call a secondary location. You're going to buy consumer electronics, housewares, and oh, by the way, we're in the mall. Let's go over here and have a hamburger and a beer and sit down and rest a while. So we moved from a secondary position almost into a primary, where the reason to go to the mall was to visit a Nebraska brewing company or restaurant X, Y, or Z. And that just continued to happen, and with no replacements, to those storefronts. They vacated, went dark. And I don't know, 24 months, I should have acted on, my thoughts, but you always kind of hope for what's around the corner. And the mall changed hands, sold off. And, their hopes were to revitalize it, bring in new occupants. And it really didn't happen. So ultimately, you just had to look at things and go, this isn't going to play out long term. We're struggling too much, to keep the lights burning. When I say that, everything's a struggle, and believe me, there's nobody in the industry that works harder, than the team we've got assembled. But you wondered, if you were somewhere else with that level of effort, would it be more fruitful? And ultimately, that's what caused us to say no more on that location.
Do you miss it?
There are days when, I think back then everything was formative for us. We had never, done 1, 2, or 3 different things. And, you're plodding along the way, bumping your head against the wall. We still do that, of course, but that was really the childhood for Nebraska Brewing Company. And in our formative years, that's where, we met all of these great regulars. The industry being much smaller tend to have, industry stalwarts show up out of the blue. And, you got Avery sitting at the end of the bar, and, he's just moving through town, and Jamil Zainasheff would pay a visit. And, that was cool, because it was being, kind of that birth moment, and you moved on. But I don't miss the 2, 3 a.m. wake up calls for a door that was left open, and the alarm is going off. And, there's still a lot of people out there that deal with that, but I don't miss that aspect, because sleep is rare in the first place. And, those types of things contribute to it.
More with Paul in a moment, but first, a word of thanks to this episode's sponsors, and I hope you'll give them a closer look. At Athletic Brewing Company, their innovative process allows them to brew great tasting craft beer without the alcohol. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 6-packs or more. And we're brought to you by NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted over 150 years to produce some of the world's finest hops. NZ Hops are like no other, unique in their flavors and aromas. Visit nzhops.co.nz to explore more. And now, back to my conversation with Paul Kavulak of Nebraska Brewing Company. So if that was your childhood, or the brewery's childhood, it's sort of a fun segue. I think I might just shoehorn this in. Your brewery, your and your wife's brewery, has really become a full-fledged family business. You have your kids involved now. You have cousins involved. When you first opened up, did you want your kids involved in the brewery? Did this happen organically? I know that there's a lot of folks who have second generations sort of, coming up, and some brewery owners hope, like, I hope the kids take over one day, or, I'm building this for them, or, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What was your and Kim's approach early on, with your kids when you started the brewery?
It's funny, Connor, and Dylan and Connor, and they've always been around it, Riley as well. I've got pictures of Connor stirring homebrew mash in his diapers, and Dylan's playing
that's
behind
not
him.
Sanitary, man. Come on.
Yeah, there's some beers out there.
I mean, you're talking about quality control earlier. This is yeah.
But when we started this thing, it was always our goal, to have the kids and the extended family be around to some extent, and that's up to them to decide where they want to fit, and if there's a place, great, we'll try them out, and we also are very aware that Kim and I had day jobs and professional careers before we did this. And, to some extent, it would have been good to have them get out into a universe that isn't run by family and see what it's like and then come back. But, they worked as soon as they could. And, the child labor laws in Nebraska anyway, are you can employ your own kids pretty much at any age. I'm sure I got that wrong, but
Yeah,
they were,
that sounds like farmland rules. If you're old enough to steer the tractor, then yeah,
yep. So they
steer the
found their way
tractor.
into different jobs early on. And Riley, my daughter, she's working at a bank now and still works part-time, but Connor, as a matter of fact, is headed down to Kansas City right now. He's in sales and marketing with my niece, Sarah. They're going to do sales down there for 2 days. Dylan is working the canning line today, runs operations. And Kim's kind of the GM that, I'll screw things up for the world and then she'll sweep it all back up into a pile, put a bow on it, and we'll move on.
You mentioned giving them a try. If they say, okay, I want to give this a go, and you give them a try, and I think that's a great thing for parents to do. Have you had the conversation in your mind of like, okay, like we're gonna try this, and if it doesn't work out, I'm gonna have to treat the kid like an employee versus my kid and have tough lessons, or is it different having a child, your progeny working for you?
Well, that's one of the things I noticed early on. I came out of an IT universe where I was heavy handed. Things had to be done the way they needed to be done, or things suffered, either the business, the client, or the employee. And I was very quick to act. The difference being now that the need to act is still there, but it's more of a coaching
Okay.
philosophy. And, there are still those moments where, maybe I let this one go too far. And by the time I got to, set the hook and reel them in, it's a little painful. But it still happens. And I think the best thing that they all understand right now is that at the end of the day, it's a business. In spite of the fact, how you're related to anybody else that works there, jobs got to get done, and they got to get done well.
Yeah. And even though it's Nebraska Brewing Company, the family name might as well be on the front door.
Yeah, no kidding. Exactly. Yeah, I've told that story too. We weren't supposed to be Nebraska Brewing Company. We developed some artwork as Flatland Brewing Company, and we collided with a brew pub. I want to say Ohio. I probably got that wrong, but this is before we emerged. But I had put a large amount of money in development of our corporate logo and some of our brands, and they all said Flatland. So instead of bringing lawyers into the mix, myself and the other gentleman just had a phone call, and he just asked me. He says, "What would you do if you were in a situation?" And he wanted to protect his brand, and I said I would tell me to find another name. And Kim and I agonized and ultimately came up with a plan to preserve the artwork by coming up with a different business name that would replace Flatland letter for letter. And Nebraska was, the one that emerged, and we didn't have to go through the expense of modifying artwork.
I'm seeing a Flatland Brewing Company in California.
Yeah. Now there's an interesting aspect of the story. That original guy, they went under, they folded, closed for whatever reason. And then that name sat vacant for quite some time. And now I see the other guy. And by the way, I like them on Facebook because I'm amused by the fact that someone else has popped up with that name, and I wish them well. But yeah, that was a collision in our past.
Yikes. Well, I'm sorry to dredge up all of this painful past for you. But that's sort of it, right? I mean, you have to roll with it. And these days, I mean, I talk to brewers all the time who are just trying to even just name beers, which is, difficult. But, for something, when you have a name in your head for a brewing company, or for your company, that can be a really tough thing, to change your mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was. I'm sitting at the desk that I sat in when I had to agonize over that situation. And, your business plan it's embedded in there. You've thought about this for years, and, hey, before you start, let's just change it all. Yeah, that's really tough.
It's impossible to know what, happened in the other timeline of, if you did get Flatland Brewing Company. Do you think having the Nebraska state name attached to your brewery, though, was ultimately a benefit for sales and for recognition?
I think so. And when we chose the name, the first thing I thought was, man, we're arrogant as hell by taking the state's name. And there were two Nebraska brewing companies that existed before us, 1897 to 98 and 1994 to 96. And we thought, okay, they've come and gone. Let's make sure that we don't go down the same path. And it's funny because Nebraska and Iowa have such a rivalry in sports and everything else. So we can't sell a beer in Iowa, but we can sell a beer in China, Japan, everywhere else. And, it just depends on where you're from and how you view that name. We view it as making, some of the best beers out there and synonymous with quality.
Let's back up a little bit. Are you actually saying that if you try, do you sell beer in Iowa at all?
We used to, and the reps were met with some pushback, not because of the beer, but because of the name, and it's entrenched. And I can't
you're
say
on the border essentially.
Oh yeah, you can. Well, if you got a strong arm, you can throw a baseball into Council Bluffs, and we could probably sell beer in Council Bluffs. But of course, do we want to just sell beer in a neighboring city, or do we want to sell beer in the other side of Iowa out in Davenport? The answer is the latter. So it's not that that's the end of the world, but it's been an eyebrow raising aspect of trying to move beer over there.
And it just won't sell.
Well, it hasn't sold to the point where we said, you know what, let's roll back a bit. We'll take a pause and see what we want to do later over there.
Wow. I hadn't really thought about state rivalry like that before, but that's some next level state pride, and that's coming from a guy who lives in New Jersey. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and your experience may differ.
Yeah, but that's kind of fun. I want to switch gears with you. I got an email the other day from a guy named Brendan Orr, who said that he was at your brewery working the last time that I visited, and we didn't get a pint because he was in the back working and we were in the front having a good time. And he listens to the podcast, and he mentioned that he had left Nebraska and was about to open up a brewery in Wisconsin, or hoping to open up a brewery in Wisconsin. And one of the benefits, I think, of your longevity now of almost 15 years is you've been able to create sort of a farm team, or have people who learn under you and then sort of go out and open up their own place. And there's some breweries that really chafe at that. They say, well, if you're working here, you work for us and we don't want you thinking about something else. What's been your approach for people who are chasing that brewing dream, chasing that entrepreneurial spirit, the very same things that brought you to beer? You've seen brewers come and go and launch their own thing over the years. What's that like for you as the owner?
As the fledgling or the the person with the ideas of making their own brewery and coming from within Nebraska Brewing Company at a high level, I'm extremely proud, frankly, that we have developed that farm team. And those guys, I'm trying to think if I've actually, tossed anybody out. Yeah, well, one parted ways because we were not seeing eye to eye relative to quality. But, I really enjoy the fact that when you look down the street, Sam down in Lincoln with Cosmic Eye, and
yep.
Here's a brewer that did it right. Just like Brandon seems to be doing it. They approached it from the perspective of I want to learn. I want to be around this. I want to know the nuances. I want to create a quality product. And frankly, to have goals, you always want to be better than whatever it was you're familiar with. And we've got, I don't know, three or five that I could probably come up with right now that, essentially they either created their own brewery or, worked at other breweries. And I feel great that they carried it with them. Now, I also have had, brewers that had the dream and began to go about it in a way that was, I wouldn't call it divisive, but not necessarily in the interests of the business they worked for, that they openly trying to recruit and, those
Yikes.
things. Yeah. Well, those can be harmful, to the parent brewery. And in spite of that, they moved on and they make excellent beers that are something we can all be proud of.
But that sort of speaks to, you reap what you sow. If you sort of had that divisiveness early on, or underhanded tactics, you can almost expect that to happen to you later on, or at least you should expect, or not be surprised if it happens to you later on.
Yeah. People are people, and some understand that, let's go about this and be a team, independent of whether or not, it's the team of the brewery you're working with or for. But when you emerge and you hit the streets and put on your own storefront, you're still part of that team. And it's good to be able to get out there and say, I did it right, and look back on it and smile.
Yeah. I mean, there's been breweries in the past that have had direct impacts on the greater beer industry. And I think of Josh Noel's book about Goose Island in those early days, and all of the brewers that one brewery spawned. And so much of the creativity that was allowed, and so much of the focus on quality, and the sales focus and everything else, I think grew the beer industry as people went out into their own into their own places. And it does strike me that anybody who is open these days should approach it the same way of, it's not just going to be what happens within our four walls or coming out of our branded tap handles. It's going to be the impact that we have when people leave us and go do their own thing.
Right. And I mean, look at the landscape now. I lost track. It's funny because I made this comment recently too. When we first started, there were 1,400 breweries the day we opened. That fell to 1,200 during the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And by today's comparison, there's, over 9,000, I think. And
is that the number that we're at right now? I've still been saying 8,200. Yeah.
Yeah. Last I tracked, we were in the I thought it was high 8,000s, but back then I could probably name literally 75% of the breweries in existence and a good portion of their portfolio. And now you're like, there's a brewery, 2 miles away. Who are they? That kind of thing.
Not only are you a brewer, but you're also a beer fan.
Oh, absolutely. I'm, because of COVID, we just didn't circulate a whole lot. I've got my 2 shots behind me, so I'll be moving around soon. But, I have styles that appeal to me, and I have styles that don't. And I think my general rule is, like I mentioned earlier, try them all. And, that's how I stumbled into some of this stuff. Tyson came up with the Black Betty core recipe, and we stumbled into a sampling at Falling Rock that had a distillery that I think we still can't name, but a fantastic distillery.
And I had it local?
It was local out there. Yeah, they've been bought by some
okay
higher ups, but
yeah,
the beer that emerged from that barrel,
consult your Google.
Had these notes of vanillin or vanilla, and I thought, holy cow! And that wasn't really something that I would have said that's my go-to style, but you try it and you discover, aspects that you want to bring home and incorporate into other things. And before you know it, you're doing, different things. And that's another comment I want to make is, we've got brewers on board besides Tyson. There's Julie and Tony. And it used to be back in the day, it was, Paul would say, look, we want to play in this space. And now they're bringing, their experiences to me, and we let them, brew on the pilot system. And it's so good to have that much creativity and to function as a creative mind versus just, 1 or 2 guys trying to come up with stuff.
I've been thinking a lot about creativity because over the course of the last year with the pandemic, I've been talking with folks who it either seems to be falling one of 2 ways. The pandemic has allowed them to make styles of beer that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to in the past. And we've seen an influx of lagers where people just have spare tanks that they can let sit for 6, 8, 10 weeks, where they didn't in the past. Or the lack of camaraderie, the lack of being out in the world, the lack of or the worry of keeping the lights on has stifled creativity. What's it been like for you all?
Well, we'll still, in the background, we're always experimenting. We're always, trying to push our own envelope, but you kind of touch back on that piece that just COVID is horrible. But, there are annoying aspects that just eat away at you. And the one is, that lack of experience, so that you've got those ideas to bring back and tweak and be as innovative as you want to be. And um, it's been annoying, painful, and I am so grateful that we seem to be, knock on wood, getting on the back end of this, and we'll get right back at it and start pushing again.
You've entered into seltzers along with so many other folks right now, and obviously it's a growth area. I mean, it's unprecedented growth, and when you look at the IRI numbers and the Nielsen numbers, it's just bananas. So I can understand why people are getting into it. I've struggled with it because I enjoy drinking some of them, but I try to find the creativity in them. Much like I do with beer, IPAs or barrel-aged stouts or whatever, and I keep coming up empty. And I think that's just because it's a relatively simple product with, straightforward tastes. Are you trying to be creative with your seltzers, or is it, just give the people what they want?
To me, it's an evolution, and the first step in that evolution is getting the seltzers properly and well made. And I Facebooked what appeared to be a glass of water months ago. And, I said, it's funny that so much time and effort goes into getting this right. And that was the first seltzer that I felt we had done properly, because you can really come out with a seltzer that's not awesome. They're off colored, their aromas are off putting. So the initial goals were make it right, make it something we all enjoy, get it into the hands of the distributors, prove that, we've got a seltzer that works, get the branding around it. It's such a, big process. And what struck me though, and it was an odd comment, one of our distributors, we said, well, here we are, we've got these seltzers, we want to push them. And he says, man, this should have been part of your annual business plan. So, well, it was. And then he says, wow, we're getting so many seltzers from all these people that are coming in the front door, and we're not sure we can manage them all. I said, I can appreciate that, but there are fewer seltzers than there are beers.
Yeah.
And, let's work together to find out how to, get these on the shelf and make it a product facet that we can move.
Yeah.
But to your point, get it done right first. And now we're experimenting with, the combinations of flavors and the things, first, what do we enjoy? And then, after we get what we enjoy down first, does it connect with the public or the consumers? And if not, how do we tweak it? And we just go through those iterations.
You haven't had too much of a experience in the tap room yet of putting it on offer, where you make it, where you are. But have you been theorizing as to what it might actually do in the tap room?
Actually, we did have one tap is on right now. And it's funny because when people encounter seltzer on draft, they're kind of taken aback. But the grapefruit was the first one that we got out there just to say, okay, guys, do we have this right? And it caught fire. And it said, okay, you're on the right path. Let's keep going. So then we put another tap up there, and I think it was the pineapple. And like any really powerful flavor, once you use a line, it's that line forever unless you replace the tubing. But when we started the tap room, it was 24 lines. We jumped to 32 during COVID. We're about ready to bump up to 40. And that's, 40 tap handles for a tap room it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Which creates its own scenario relative to management. But now we're putting on, our I loved hearing the podcast that you did with Chris Black and the others on they're rating their cellar, right?
Yeah.
They're saying this stuff's aging and it's not finding its public. So we did the same thing. We went into our cellar and, went back, and these, gold medal winning Mélange à Trois and all this cool stuff is now back on tap, while the others, make their way through the barrel program again. So it's pretty cool. You can get a lot on tap right now.
See, that's the, this is the cruel part of the show where I can't get on a plane and come down and, drink your beer on tap.
Right.
But 2 shots in the arm and we'll do it soon. I'm glad to hear that you're vaccinated and getting ready to get out there. Hope to see you out in the world again soon. I feel like it's been too long.
Yes, it has. We as of Sunday, yesterday, 2 days ago, our entire team, they had a push here in Sarpy County to get vaccinations out there, and our entire team that wasn't previously vaccinated got in line and got their first shots. So we're in good shape.
That's awesome. Paul, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for sitting down and sharing some stories and giving some insight. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and I appreciate you giving me the time today.
Well, of course, John, and thank you. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have known you for a long time, and as have I. And I'm proud to be a part of the show, man. You and I go back a long time.
We do.
There's a lot of bloggers out there, a lot of writers, and I got to say, you're the one I look to.
Oh, well, thanks. I can probably point you in the direction of some better ones, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So thanks again.
All right, John, take care.
My thanks to Paul for being on the show. And so long as you don't live in Iowa, you should grab their beers where they're available, or head to the tap room and drink from that cellar. He's got shots in the arm, and hopefully you do as well. Are you planning travel? Are you back visiting breweries? Tell me about it. I'm at John Hall, it's JOHNHOLL at beeredge.com, or on Twitter at John_Hall. And if you encounter smoked beers in the world, join the This Week in Rausch Beer conversation by getting into the group on Facebook or following TW Rausch Beer on Instagram and Twitter. Beer Edge is on social media as well, at The Beer Edge, and we're also online at beeredge.com. There you can find episodes of this show and the podcast hosted by Andy Crouch. You can find articles, you can sign up for the newsletter, and more. And if you want to learn about advertising on this show, you can reach out to Liz Melby. She's on email at liz@beeredge.com, and she'll tell you all about our very affordable rates. And speaking of advertising, I'm super grateful for our sponsors this episode. First up, NZ Hops. In a little country far down the Pacific, you'll find a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. This is NZ Hops. The industry originated in 1843, not long after the early settlers arrived from England. Years of partnership with a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through generations sees the current-day master growers proudly providing 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz, or you can find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZHops Ltd. This episode is also sponsored by Athletic Brewing. At Athletic Brewing Company, their innovative process allows them to brew great-tasting craft beer without the alcohol. From IPAs to stouts to golden ales and more, they offer a full selection of beers starting at only 50 calories. And now you can keep your head clear and enjoy the refreshing taste of beer anytime, anywhere. Place an order today at athleticbrewing.com and get free shipping on 2 six-packs or more. And if you like this show, consider leaving a review on your podcast platform of choice. Don't forget Steal This Beer every Monday and the BYO Nano podcast on the 15th of every month. Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes of this show release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm back again to drink beer and to think beer.